Okay, welcome to part five, the final part of This Week in FCPA episode 34, live, sort of, with me and Tom. Me and Tom are live anyway. This is, you're watching and I'm recording, so there you go. So, Tom, the last thing that I think we should talk about is the definition of a foreign government official. And let's use the Smith and Nephew and Biomet cases as an example of that because I think that, like I said in I think part two of this episode, probably that's the only situation where I think that the DOJ has kind of written the line on what's really a government official. Um, let's first talk about who is a foreign government official under the Act. What do the department and courts look at to determine whether or not somebody is acting as a government official?
Well, first of all, I have to say that to me, those cases are clear.
Okay.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind of the foreign governmental official status of the employees who were involved in receiving the bribes or bribes to obtain or retain business for the U.S. companies. But on the definition part, we've had three court cases with three different definitions from district court judges, as district court judges are wont to do. We may get if any one of those cases gets up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, I think, we may get some a Court of Appeals definition, but we may not. The common factors that the judges talked about were, is it truly an instrumentality of the state? Does it receive state benefits? Does the state have the right to either control the business or appoint the directors who control the business? Some other points, such as tax benefits for the company. Is it subsidized monetarily wise in any way by the state? It is control plus. And is it perceived within the country as a service delivered by or a derivative of the government? So based on that, that's why I started off by saying on the medical device cases, Biomet and Smith and Nephew cases, those to me are clearly foreign governmental officials because those governments have chosen to make their healthcare systems to nationalize them. And that's a political decision of those countries. It is integral to the governmental service to the citizens of those countries. So it has made the employees governmental officials under the definition of the FCPA. Where I think companies, so in my mind, that one's completely clear. Being from the oil industry or the energy industry in Houston, doing professional work, to me, the tougher question is when you get involved in a joint venture or some other business relationship, at what point are you dealing with a foreign governmental official, or at what point does a joint venture, for instance, become an instrumentality of the government? And there, we heard some factors yesterday which seem to lead or be based on three things: control, something less than control that they called influence, and then who's the ultimate beneficiary of the money's paid. So that's another way to look at it, particularly in the joint venture context, because some people have advocated a bright line 50.1% rule that makes it joint venture owned by a foreign government and therefore instrumentality thereof. Therefore, everyone's a foreign governmental official. Um, but that really belies the fact that an American company may go into a foreign jurisdiction and have majority control. But the foreign government actually, they may not even proactively control, but they certainly have the right to say no. And they certainly have a veto power even with less than 50%. So the department also takes the position that it is not only the right to control under the governance of the venture, but also who actually gets the final say.
It was interesting because, when it comes to joint ventures, my experience with joint ventures is, we companies I've worked for, we've had joint ventures, and companies I've worked for, our joint venture partner was the government. And one interesting aspect there, which I didn't think about at the time how it would play out legally, but it was apparent to us, and there was really no confusion within the joint venture who was on the government side and who was on our side. It was very clear. If you asked anybody, are they on the government side or are they on the corporate side? Anybody could tell you the answer to that question. So I think if somebody were to bribe one of the employees, it would be very apparent whether or not that person was government or not. So I think that could at least play into the discussion. I wonder whether or not, as you were talking about the healthcare, I want to be able to say that, I have a tougher time seeing healthcare as a national service and as a government service versus a private service. But I guess, that's me being a little U.S. centric, and frankly, behind the times U.S. centric. Potentially, I don't know how right now with the U.S. Supreme Court arguments going on, whether or not in the U.S. that's still a realistic view of healthcare. But I guess, look, if in a different country healthcare is seen as a public service, I think you're right that in that circumstance it would be clear, in my mind, even if the government doesn't necessarily own 50.1% of the hospital. If it's a public service, the government is going to have sufficient influence over the standards of the hospital, over the operations of the hospital, probably over the payments, and how much people get paid. That it's that it would turn them into government officials. Again, now, this is an area where I don't think people are saying, if only I knew whether or not they were government official, my actions would change. I think that, the general rules that I've heard, or the rule of thumb, I guess would be the better way, everybody in China,
Yes.
just everybody in China, consider them government. And that's how most companies act. And if you ask companies, they're not, companies talk about how they'd love to have a better definition of foreign government official. What they're really saying is, in my mind, what they're really saying is, I wish that Congress would limit the definition of government official to exclude instrumentalities.
Right.
I think that's what they're really saying. Realistically, I don't think people are confused about whether or not somebody is a government official or not. I don't think they're confused on how to work their pro hoc definitions or ad hoc definitions into ad hoc, not pro hoc, ad hoc definitions into their due diligence program. I don't think that there's confusion about that. I think that people have adjusted to the sort of working definitions of government official, which frankly, you read the court decisions, and you read the DOJ's announcements on this prior to the court decisions, and frankly, they're all pretty consistent with common practice. How an average compliance person, a reasonable compliance person, would determine whether or not somebody is a government official. Are they truly government? Are they getting paid out of government coffers? How much does the government control the corporation? How much is it seen? Do they get tax breaks? These are all the things that, frankly, we were looking at anyway.
Right.
So it didn't. I don't think the court decisions broke new ground. I think that it gave people comfort that their pre-existing thoughts on the definition were correct. But I see this as, frankly, a red herring issue. I think that this is that when people say they want a better definition, what they really want is a limiting definition of foreign government official.
Well, I suppose we have a little time. We could explore the issue then of that was brought up in, I guess, originally the Lindsay case, but which was what does it mean of an instrumentality under the Act? Does that include a state-owned enterprise? Is it broad enough to include that? Is it narrow enough? For instance, a professor has clearly argued he does not believe that it was intent of Congress that state-owned enterprises be covered under the FCPA, at least under the definition of an instrumentality. Is that something that is part of this discussion on reform of the Act?
I think that frankly I hear the argument, right? Based on the legislative history, based on the professor's argument, I'm willing to say that at least it's arguable that Congress did not intend that the statute includes state-owned entities. Okay, I'm willing to concede that, at least arguendo. But I think that argument doesn't play out nowadays because Congress there's no secret that the DOJ is doing this. It's not a secret. It's talked about. Congress is certainly aware that state-owned entities are being included under the definition of instrumentality. If Congress truly wanted that state-owned entities not be considered instrumentalities, that we limit it to things like the FBI, which isn't an agency per se, it's a bureau. The SEC, for example, it's not an agency, it's a commission. If you want to exclude those from the definition, then that would take, in my mind, a separate act of Congress, because it's being included now. Congress knows it's being included in now. It's been included for the last 15, 20 years, since frankly, I think it was Peter Clark, back when he was running it, that first was coming up with these definitions. So I think that while you might have had an argument in 1987, I don't think you have an argument in 2012 that there is real, true that we are violating congressional intent at this point on including state-owned entities in the under the definition of foreign government official.
I was trying to think if I've seen any instances where there's been a clamor or call for that, even a suggestion of amending the act, but I guess because we didn't have that first trial court determination until last year, perhaps commentators have not really posited that forward yet.
Yeah, I think, and I think that not only do we have now comfort as to the definition of a foreign government official, I also think they got it right. I mean, I think that you don't want to have a static definition. I think that you need a definition that includes factors to consider, because we want to capture people that are considered government, even if it's not 50.1% owned by the government. I think that the risk, which again, this kind of flows into the whether or not there's an overly aggressive enforcement, because the risk is in situations where the government has one board member, right? Where OFAC has said that could potentially give control, of the company to that board member. I don't see that being a real. I don't see the government pushing it that far. And if even in Biomet, Smith and Nephew, which were kind of my examples in my head of kind of iffy,
right?
But if realistically, if I'm just being U.S. centric and in those locations they really are seen as government actors, I don't think you're right. I think that it's clear, and I don't think it's iffy in those circumstances either, which tells me that the department really isn't being overly aggressive in its definition. I think that the cases that they argued, CFE and ICE, they're clear. I don't think you can get clear that the Mexican electricity company is a government official.
Right.
So there we go. That's what we have time for in episode 34. So thank you, Tom. A pleasure. And hopefully we'll be able to meet up at conferences and do more live. I thought this was actually kind of fun.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
All right.